The porcelain plates hit the floor one after another, shattering against the polished wood. Pasta, sauce, vegetables, all of it scattered like wreckage across the rug. The air was heavy with the smell of food, but there was nothing comforting about it. It was a scent of waste, of humiliation. She was on her knees in the middle of it, her white dress stained with tomato red, her hair falling in loose strands across her face. Every movement she made was small, cautious, as though any wrong breath might spark another explosion. Her husband's voice cut through the silence, low but sharp enough to slice. "Pick it up." She froze. Her hands trembled above the mess, knuckles scraped from the shards. When she didn't move quickly enough, he stepped closer. "Did you not hear me? I said lick it off the floor." The words dropped like stones inside her chest. Something inside her cracked, the way glass gives way under pressure. Her stomach churned with equal parts shame and disbelief. She had lived with his anger, his impatience, even his silence. But this was no longer anger. This was cruelty. And then, as if to twist a knife, another presence cut into the scene. The woman in the red dress. She had been watching from the sofa, legs crossed, eyes cold with a kind of satisfaction that only comes from power. Without hesitation, she stood and walked across the room. Her heels clicked against the hardwood, as though she were marching to claim victory. She stopped over the wife, her shadow falling across her like a scar. Slowly, almost ceremonially, she raised her leg and pressed her foot against the wife's back, forcing her lower, pressing her face toward the ruined meal. "Obedience looks good on her," the mistress said, her voice smooth, almost amused. The husband didn't flinch. He stood in his tailored suit, hands tucked into his pockets, watching as though this wasn't his wife but some stranger, a servant who had failed him. His jaw tightened, his eyes narrowed, but there was no trace of the man she once married. The wife's palm flattened against the sticky floor. The food clung to her skin, oily and sour. For a moment, she thought she might vomit. The sting of humiliation seared hotter than the pain in her scraped knees. In her mind, fragments of memory flashed. Her wedding day, when he had held her hands and promised never to let them go. The night she had stayed awake, waiting for him to come home, convincing herself that love was patient, that love was sacrifice. She had built her world on those promises, brick by brick, until this very moment had smashed them into dust. Her lips hovered just inches above the floor. She could feel her heart racing in her throat. The mistress pressed harder, and the weight of the foot against her back made it difficult to breathe. That was when it happened. A spark. It was faint at first, buried under layers of fear and exhaustion. But it was there, alive. She realized she had two choices, surrender completely or let that spark grow. The mistress leaned down, whispering close enough for her to feel her breath. "See how pathetic you are? No wonder he doesn't want you anymore." Her fingers curled into fists. She hadn't realized how hard until her nails dug into her own palms. Pain reminded her she was still human, not an object, not a toy. She turned her head slightly, enough to catch her husband's gaze. For the first time in years, she looked directly at him, not with pleading eyes but with something colder, something steadier. And for the briefest second, she thought she saw it, the flicker of unease in his stare. Her lips parted, not to obey, not to lick the floor, but to breathe, to pull air into her lungs, to fill herself with the strength she thought she had lost. The mistress frowned, sensing resistance, pressing harder with her heel. The wife's voice trembled when it came, but there was steel in it. "This isn't the end." The room went silent. The husband tilted his head, studying her as though he had just discovered something he hadn't noticed before. The mistress's smirk faltered, only for a moment. The wife lowered her face again, hiding the small, defiant smile forming at the corner of her lips. They thought she was broken. They thought she was defeated. But inside, the spark had become a flame. And flames, once lit, are not so easily extinguished. Long after the food was cleared, long after the mistress had left in her red dress with a sly smile, she sat alone in the dim kitchen. Her knees still ached from the hardwood floor. Her palms still burned from the shards of porcelain. But the deeper pain, the one in her chest, was harder to name. She stared at her reflection in the window glass. Her hair was tangled, her dress stained, her face pale. The woman staring back at her didn't look like the girl she once was. And in that quiet, bruised silence. The past came rushing back, uninvited. She remembered their beginning, the day she met him. He had carried himself like the world belonged to him. He wasn't the most handsome man in the room, but he had the kind of presence that made people turn when he spoke. His laughter had been warm, his eyes sharp but not yet cruel. She had been young, idealistic, and he had looked at her as if she were the only one worth noticing. They walked through late-night markets hand in hand, sharing skewers and cheap beer, laughing about dreams. He told her he wanted to build something bigger than himself, a company, a legacy. She told him she didn't need riches, only love. He had kissed her forehead and said, "Then we'll have both." And she believed him. The wedding was simple, but radiant. She wore white, and when she saw him waiting at the end of the aisle, she had felt like the luckiest woman alive. His vows were tender. He promised to protect her, to cherish her, to never let her feel alone. For years, she carried those words like a shield. Through the long hours he worked, through the missed dinners, through the quiet distance that began to grow. At first, it was easy to forgive. He was busy building their future. She told herself sacrifices were part of love. She cooked his favorite meals, waited up late with tea, ironed his shirt before important meetings. But one evening, she found a lipstick-stained tie in his car. Her hand shook as she held it. The color wasn't hers. When she confronted him, he laughed, not the warm, boyish laugh she remembered, but something cold. He brushed it off as a client's playful mistake. She wanted to believe him. She chose to. That night, she folded the tie neatly into the back of the closet, as if burying evidence of a crime she didn't dare admit. The cracks widened. He grew impatient, dismissive. He criticized the way she dressed, the way she cooked, the way she filled silence with questions. She adapted, shrinking herself to fit the space he allowed. Then came the mistress. The woman in red didn't sneak into their life. She walked in boldly, at company events, at dinners, in the photos that popped up on social media feeds. At first, people whispered. Then they stopped, because the whispers turned into an open secret. Her humiliation wasn't private anymore. It was public. She remembered the night she finally heard it from his lips. They were sitting in the living room, and he didn't even bother to lower his voice. She understands me. She knows how to support me without clinging. Her hands had gone cold. And what am I? He looked at her as though she were asking a foolish question. You're my wife. That should be enough. She thought of leaving then. She even packed a suitcase once. But when she reached the door, memories stopped her. The first kiss, the whispered promises, the warmth of his hand covering haze. Could those years really be erased by betrayal? Could love really rot into something so poisonous? She unpacked, telling herself he would change, that people lost their way, but they could be found again. But the night he threw food on the floor and forced her down, that was when the last illusion died. Sitting in the kitchen now, with a faint hum of the refrigerator filling the silence, she let herself finally name the truth. The man she loved no longer existed. Maybe he had never existed at all. Maybe she had built him in her mind, crafted him out of promises and hope. Her throat tightened. Tears blurred her vision, but she didn't wipe them away. She let them fall, splashing against the table like rain. She whispered into the empty room, her voice hoarse. I gave you everything, and you gave me ashes. The sound of it startled her. Saying it out loud made it real. And yet, beneath the grief, the spark from earlier still smoldered. She had bent under his cruelty, but she had not broken. Not yet. The thought frightened her and comforted her all at once. The door creaked open. He appeared in the doorway, tie loosened, expression unreadable. He glanced at her, then at the untouched dishes on the counter. Don't sit here sulking, he said flatly. Clean yourself up. We have guests tomorrow. He left without waiting for an answer. Her eyes followed him until the door clicked shut. Then she closed her fists and pressed them against her chest, right where her heart still beat, steady and defiant. If he wanted obedience, if he wanted silence, he would soon learn he had underestimated the woman kneeling in the ruins of his dinner. This wasn't the end. It was the beginning of her reckoning. She began with silence. It was easier that way, easier to master thoughts beneath lowered eyes and quiet nods. He believed silence was submission. He didn't notice the shift, the subtle difference between obedience and watchfulness. But she noticed. Every movement she made, every word she held back, was deliberate now. He thought she was broken. He thought the humiliation had finally crushed the loss of her spirit. But under the still surface, she was moving, gathering pieces, preparing. It started with documents. While he worked late nights with a mistress draped over his arm, she searched through drawers and files. Bank statements, contracts, company reports, anything she could find. She had once trusted him enough to never ask about money. Now, she studied every number like it was a weapon waiting to be sharpened, and she found them. The irregularities, the quiet transfers, the offshore account tucked away under a shell company. She didn't know the full picture yet, but she knew enough. His empire wasn't built as cleanly as he pretended. She took photos with her phone, storing them in hidden folders, emailing copies to a private account under a false name. Her hands shook each time, but she told herself fear was natural. Fear meant she was still alive. Then came the evidence of his betrayal. She started recording. Conversations at home, phone call that drifted through half-open doors. The mistress spoke freely, bragging about how she had him wrapped around her finger, how she would soon replace the boring wife. Each word recorded was another brick in the wall she was building against him. At night, she lay awake, the phone under her pillow, listening to his steady breathing beside her. She remembered when that sound once comforted her, a reminder that she wasn't alone. Now it was a reminder of danger, the danger of sleeping next to someone who would rather see her crawl than stand. But reckoning wasn't only about collecting proof. It was about reclaiming herself. She looked at the woman in the mirror and began to rebuild. The first step was small. She pulled her hair back neatly, the way she used when she felt confident. The second was harder. She called an old friend, someone she had cut off years ago under his disapproval. The voice on the other end cracked with surprise, then softened with warmth. "You sound different," her friend said. "I'm trying to be," she whispered. Every conversation reminded her she still had people who cared. Every act of reaching out stitched together a piece of the self she had lost. But the house grew colder. He noticed a distance, though he misread it. One evening, as they sat at dinner, he studied her quietly, then smirked. "So you finally learned how to behave." She forced a small smile, her heart hammering. If he knew the truth, if he saw even a flicker of defiance in her, everything would collapse. The mistress, too, sensed something shifting. When she visited, she circled like a predator, heels echoing in the hallways. One afternoon, she leaned close and whispered, "I can smell rebellion on you. Don't try to be clever. You'll lose." The wife met her gaze, steady, unflinching. "Maybe, but maybe not." The mistress blinked, thrown for a moment, before recovering with a laugh. But in that laugh, the wife heard something new, unease. The breaking point came one stormy night. Rain lashed against the windows. The mistress was there again, wine in hand, her laughter sharp. He was pacing the room, shouting into his phone about a deal gone wrong. His empire was trembling, though he didn't admit it yet. The wife stood in the doorway, watching the storm outside mirror the storm inside. And then she spoke, her voice calm but cutting. "I want a divorce." The room froze. The mistress lowered her glass. He turned slowly, disbelief written across his face. "What did you just say?" Her hands trembled, but she didn't back down. "I said I want a divorce. You've taken everything from me, but you won't take what's left." He laughed, a harsh, mocking sound. "You think you can leave me? You think anyone would take you once they know what you are?" But she didn't flinch. Instead, she pulled her phone from her pocket, unlocked the screen, and played the recordings. His voice, the mistress's voice, the proof of everything. His smirk vanished. The mistress shifted uncomfortably, her face paling. The wife's voice stayed calm. "I've already made copies. If anything happens to me, they'll go straight to the authorities. So don't threaten me. Don't touch me. This time, you've lost." For the first time in years, the power shifted. He saw it, too, her defiance, her control. His fists clenched, his jaw tightened, but he didn't move. Not this time. The mistress tried to laugh it off, but her voice wavered. "She's bluffing." But the wife wasn't. and they both knew it. She walked out of the room, heart pounding, knees weak, but every step felt like reclaiming a piece of herself. The storm roared outside, and for once, it didn't scare her. The reckoning had begun. The divorce was not quiet. He had tried to make it one, of course. He thought money could smother noise, that power could erase shame. But the recordings leaked, the documents surfaced, and whispers turned into headlines. Board members who once praised him now questioned his judgment. Clients pulled out of deals. His empire began to crack, piece by piece, under the weight of truths he could no longer bury. She didn't watch it unfold with glee. She didn't have the strength for gloating. She only watched with a strange detachment, as though witnessing the collapse of a building she had once lived in, one she barely escaped before it fell. The mistress disappeared first. One day she was on his arm. The next she was gone. Her phone disconnected. Her apartment emptied. Loyalty had never been part of the arrangement. She left the moment the ground shook beneath him. He was alone. For her, life didn't change all at once. It was slow, like learning to walk again after being forced to crawl. She moved into a small apartment overlooking a street lined with trees. The furniture was second-hand, the walls bare, but it was hers. No footsteps echoing with rage. No cold silences pressing down on her. Just quiet, broken only by the hum of the kettle, the rustle of leaves outside her window. At first, the silence frightened her. She wasn't used to nights without tension, mornings without dread. But in that silence, she began to rediscover herself. She took long walks, breathing air that didn't feel suffocating. She started writing again, something she had abandoned when he told her it was a childish hobby. Words came slowly at first, then poured out, pages filled with pieces of a story she hadn't been able to speak. One afternoon, she sat at a cafe with her notebook open. A stranger at the next table smiled and asked what she was writing. She felt her face flush, but for the first time in years, she didn't hide. She answered, and they talked, not about loss or betrayal, but about books, about films, about simple things. It wasn't love. Not yet. But it was connection. It reminded her she was still alive, still capable of being seen. Meanwhile, he unraveled. She heard about it through whispers, through news articles she didn't seek but couldn't avoid. His company dissolved into lawsuits. His reputation turned to dust. Photos of him appeared online, not in tailored suits but disheveled, hollow-eyed, as though the weight of regret was finally visible in his frame. And yet, he tried. He called. He sent messages. He showed up once at her apartment, suit wrinkled, voice hoarse. "You can't leave me like this," he said, his tone a mix of command and plea. She stood in the doorway, calm, steady. "I already did." He swallowed hard, searching her face for softness, for the woman who once bent to his will. But she was gone, or rather, she had transformed. "You'll regret this," he muttered, though his voice cracked. "No," she replied softly. "You will." She closed the door. On the other side, she thought she heard him exhale, broken. But she didn't open it again. Time passed. Seasons shifted. She no longer counted the days since the humiliation, since the shattering. Instead, she marked new days. The first time she laughed without bitterness. The first time she woke up without dread. The first time she looked in the mirror and recognized herself. One evening, she stood at her window, the city lights flickering like distant stars. She thought about everything she had endured, the promises, the betrayals, the cruelty, the night she had been forced onto the floor among broken plates. And she realized something that startled her. She didn't hate him anymore. Hatred would have chained her to him still. But she was free. What remained wasn't hate, but a scar, a reminder of what she survived, and proof of the strength she never knew she had. The man who once forced her to kneel now walked the streets as a shadow of himself, chasing ghosts of power and affection that had abandoned him. His regret was endless, but it wasn't her burden to carry. Her burden was gone. She closed her notebook that night, whispering to herself, "Survival wasn't enough. I came back stronger." And as she turned off the light, she smiled, not for him, not for anyone else, but for herself. The ashes of love had become the soil of her rebirth.